Hello. Hello. Where is my chat? Are the people out there? I don't know. I don't know. I gotta find the chat. Um, that's actually like slang the kids say these days. They say something like, hello, chat. Um, there's the chat. Hey, hello, Lisa in Florida. How are y'all doing? Can you all hear me and see me? Can you put something in the chat? Like an emoji or a hello or a bad joke or something like that? How are we all doing? I'm gonna say something. Howdy. Technological. Technologic. I'm I'm getting to the point where if anyone is anyone on TikTok, I'm getting to the point where I only speak TikTok things. Like like the Katy Perry song. You're like an Indian summer. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Um in the middle of the winter. Hey, there everybody is. Where are you all YouTubing in from? From the Pacific Northwest. Hello, this reality sucks. It's a good name. I'm with you on that. Hey Patrick, great to see you. Hey Lily. Good day. Hello. If a soldier is an overt agent of the state, what's a covert agent of the state? I don't know. I'm not covering that kind of those questions. That's not my area of expertise. Although I kind of dig your vibe. Hello. Hey everybody, I'm looking at the chat like I'm thinking, and this is always. Is anyone ever overstimulated on these things? This is always. We've been doing this for years now with the Zoom and everything like that, but I'm still like, what's happening? Northern Rockies, Florida, Ontario, UK. I love this. Hi from New York. I was looking at the one we did last time, and like, we were having so much fun on the last live. What are you people? What are you? What are you all? Sorry. What are you all listening to? Right now, I'm listening to Lola Young. You have to, if you don't know her, check her out. You know her already with that song Messy, but the real song is a song called Crush by Lola Young. We should all listen to it now. Good evening from Sweden. Hello from Sweden, Johanna. Kansas. Yep, we got people from the Pacific Northwest. Lots of folks from the Pacific Northwest. Overstimulated. Yes, this is a, yep. Um, Blue White Eyes. Hello from Southwest Virginia. Southwest Virginia, not too far from me. I have to go west, north, east, west. Joy Division. What Joy Division is it? Benson Boone. Is he that new guy that played at Coachella and Brian Benson Boone? Did he play Coachella and Brian May came out? Marianne. Sorry, I can't read it. Is that him? Kind of a young guy, really fun. Hello from Orlando. I need songs, people. What's your favorite song right now? Berlin. That is also both a place and a band. Meet Me Halfway by Shane Alexander. I don't know that. East Tennessee. Close to me. Okay. East, West. I was a Boy Scout, so I always like a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout, so I always have to go where? Which way's north? Who's north of me right now? You probably need. I'm in Western North Carolina, if anyone wants to know. Hello from Colorado. Did we just throw questions at you? No, the questions were submitted through a form, and I'm going to get to those. Unfortunately, I can't read the questions in the chat. Whatever by Spacey Jane. Lily by Kate Bush. I think I know that song. Did Berlin the band do Take My Breath Away from the 80s? Projections by Night Tapes. Night Tapes. That sounds cool and familiar. Wonderful Slippery Thing by Guthrie Govan. Cool. Empty by Cane Hill. Change by Big Thief. Very cool stuff. Stuff I need to check out. I've gone through a musical like resurgence in the last like two or 3 years. Weirdly enough, because I was starting to listen to records because I finally have a place where I can set up a record player. And then I really got back into, there was a weird period in my life where I was just listening to just the old standbys and my like indie rock and classic rock forever. But I wasn't listening to anything new. So I was really missing out on a lot of new stuff. Mean by Taylor Swift. Any Swifties in the house? Rem, hold on. Yep. REM, love it. Citizen Soldier. Home by Off With Their Heads. This is a lot of cool stuff. What about favorite colors? Zodiac signs. I don't know about you. Sometimes this childhood trauma stuff gets too heavy. So Lily by Kate Bush is wonderful. Yep. I agree with you, Kate. And hello, Kate. Yeah. What else am I into? As usual, I'm into Elliott Smith. Really into Lola Young. What do you guys think about me doing? I want to do a podcast episode about Chappell Roan's Good Luck Babe, because I hear a lot of childhood trauma stuff in it. I'm kind of a downer. I make everything about childhood trauma. Any Chappell Roan fans here with me tonight? Genesis healing. What kind of Genesis? Because there's different types of Genesis. Genesis was my first cassette tape. My first tape ever was Invisible Touch. I know every second of that album by heart. Pisces and Tangerine, very cool. I'm also a Pisces. Elliott Smith is rad. Orange is also my favorite color. Although I like that you said Tangerine. That gives it another element. Nirvana is popping up for me a lot. Which Nirvana song? I grew up on that. Yeah, it'd be cool to reference Chappell. I just love her. Something about the songwriting. What I want to do on the podcast is talk about Good Luck Babe, and tell me if you think this is a good idea, where a song really reminds you of. I think all of us in our at some point in our life has been romantically involved with a person who couldn't get out of their own way because of their childhood trauma. That's what I hear in that song. So anyone relate to what I'm kind of saying? Like you've had to really let go of somebody? Hey, James, your emoji is just coming up as like text that says hand pink waving. So hand pink waving back at you. All I know about Chappell Roan is the Pink Pony Club. Yep, it's very catchy. But Megan, check out Good Luck Babe. It went crazy viral. Yeah, viral? Yeah. Okay. All right. Should I get to the questions, or should we just keep doing this and hanging out? Because that's, the questions were so good. But like everything, The Hollow by Perfect Circle. Like I need to get into some Tool and Perfect Circle. They're in the same ballpark. Are they like different variations of Tool, Perfect Circle, or am I a little bit crazy there? Maynard, is that the guy? Does he have different variations of Tool? Help me out, because I'm feeling not hip right now if I don't know that. Music is emotionally regulating for me. Yep. Red Hot Chili Peppers. I was just looking at some YouTube stuff on the RHCP. Okay, got to vote for the Chappell Roan thing. Cool. Yikes. I'm in that podcast. We're all in that podcast episode. Rule is great. I'm going to guess that you mean Tool. I like Tool. I was about 16 or 17 years old when that first MTV song. I'm not a Tool fan. There are just some bands. I'm not a Tool fan yet. Let me preface that. The older I get, like for example, when I was in my indie rock days, like my really Weezer-ish, mid 90s, the late 90s indie rock, nothing is Radiohead is everything. Bands like Steely Dan, I would like, why do you listen to that? That's just like that's so like New Balance shoes. Steely Dan, who listens to Steely Dan? Now I love Steely Dan because I've crossed into like middle age, and a middle age white father, like you have to, cisgender white father, you have to it's like a rite of passage. You have to really be into Steely Dan, something like that. Anyway, but I still need to really listen to Tool because the time signatures and the stuff going on in it, my brain can't get my head around. So I'm not giving up hope on Tool. Maynard and Cletus are problematic too. Okay, they're problematic. But I'm sorry if I missed it in the chat. Is Perfect Circle? Yes, I am a musician, Lisa. Is Perfect Circle a variation of Tool, or did I make that up? Stevie Nicks. What is that Stevie Nicks album that I love? It's got Stop Dragging My Heart Around. It's got a tune called, oh man. I have many Stevie Nicks albums, but that one, what is the name? What is the name of that Stevie Nicks album that has Stop Dragging My Heart? Belladonna. Any Belladonna fans out there? But I'm older than you. Offspring. Yep. You're kind of like a River Cuomo. I don't know how to take that, at least. I just saw Weezer last September and they blew my mind. They were playing with the Flaming Lips. Julian Baker, Alice. She blows my mind. And what is the name of her band? They're a trio. I have the record. Boy Genius is fantastic. But she did an early version of Elliott Smith's Ballad of Big Nothing that blew my mind. And I had to go learn it. And I did go learn it. Belladonna. Yeah, that is the Stevie Nicks album from the mid-'80s where she was trying to start a band with Tom Petty. She was all about Tom Petty because I think we forget in the early '80s how big Tom Petty was. Perfect Circle is Maynard's other band, so yes, the offshoot. Thank you, Natalie. Now I can move on with my life. Maynard James Keenan is a vocalist of Tool and a Perfect... You guys you got the Google right there, even if you're not... Boy, genius. Perfect Circle, okay. Wait, are the singer, but no, just a variation. Have them on my wall, seeing them next month. Perfect Circle, Alice, or who? It was a compliment, I promise. Thank you so much, Alyssa. Okay, Tom Petty and Steve. Tomorrow Petty. Tom. I like that even better. Tomorrow Petty. Anywho, let's do the questions, everybody, because I actually pulled my back out this week, so I think I'm going to be able to give this about an hour before I have to go do stretches because I'm old. It's like I'm so desperate to be cool. Please say I'm cool. I'm from the '80s and I like Genesis and my back went out. And I'm just about to get into some New Balance shoes and offer somebody a burger and a dog from the grill, wearing some jean shorts. Like, that's where I'm headed. I'm really not that far from that. Depeche Mode in your room. What did Depeche Mode do? Violator? Because I just got that on vinyl, and that is also Personal Jesus is on it. Voltaire for goth music. Sarah McLachlan. You're not old. Oh, thank you. I am from the 70s, born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, traumatized in all 3 decades. So I got that going for me. The trauma kind of, and yeah, the trauma ended, the abuse ended in the 70s, 80s. That's a good span. Cool. Okay, so I'm cool. Breaking Benjamin, cool. All right. You're cool. Good night. I'm done with your shit. Good night. All right, let's do the questions. Okay, ready? Let's brace yourself. Don't come around here no more. Love that song. Brace yourself. We're going to flip into fun mode, into getting to the questions. Your questions were so good. I kept it to mostly parenting questions with some Ask Me Anything questions in there. Before I forget, many of these questions I'm going to be referencing Finding a Good Childhood Trauma Therapist. This is a list of therapists that we have trained. It is a link tree of RRP therapists. RRP stands for the Relationship Recovery Process. They can see you an individual, but they're also primarily group therapists. And I'm also going to be referencing the webinar that's coming up on Saturday about parenting for those who grew up in childhood trauma and are now parents, and that's a very triggering experience. So there's that. Okay, first question. I'm a recovering scapegoat who escaped an abusive relationship. My ex weaponized my scapegoat conditioning against me. I was paradoxically being the scapegoat gave me... I'm not reading this correctly. Let me start all over. I'm a recovering family scapegoat who escaped an abusive relationship. My ex weaponized my scapegoat conditioning against me, but paradoxically, being the scapegoat gave me tools to escape. I was comfortable examining myself and processing pain, which made healing possible. Fantastic. Now my toddler daughter has been, for any parent out there or anyone who grew up in a co-parenting situation that wasn't good. Now my daughter has been programmed by my ex to trigger my specific scapegoat wounds. She runs his manipulation tactics, activating all my childhood trauma responses. And this is also will also come up again in another question. I intellectually understand she needs boundaries. Well, she might need some, yes, boundaries, but some education and parenting. But my body goes into freeze fawn mode when she attacks. How do I maintain healthy parent authority with a child trained to exploit vulnerabilities created by my childhood? What How do I maintain healthy parental authority with a child trained to exploit vulnerabilities created by my childhood role growing up? Okay. And how do I help her heal from this programming without failing into my scapegoat pattern of taking responsibility for everyone else's dysfunction? Really complex question. Really, I'm glad you asked this question. So, to summarize, often when we have gone through a divorce and we have a very difficult or toxic or abusive ex and we have to share the parenting that is super messy. I want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. Finding a parental coach who does this. I had a client find a parent coach who is excellent at this kind of stuff. So there are resources out there. From my take, essentially, you're asking me, how do I parent my child around this? And for everyone to think about, and let me know if this makes sense to you in the chat. For those of us who grew up, whether you grew up in a divorce or not, kids absorb and they learn things from their parents. We absorb stuff and we reject stuff, for those of us that grew up in childhood trauma. And sometimes, not sometimes, often, when we think about our own process, there's not much can be done. Let's just say you're mentioning you have a toddler daughter who's probably going to be with your ex until they're around 18 years old. They're going to be conditioned anyway. But how you can combat it as best as you can is to, and I get it. You're getting it intellectually, but you also have some trauma response going on. The best thing you can do is check out the link to RRP therapist and find a good childhood trauma therapist and start working on your own childhood and start getting some headway into that freeze and fawn. In that work, I also recommend, which is part of RRP, is really reparenting your inner child who might, probably what we're all up against here is your toddler is learning from your ex how to be like nasty or something like that. And to find your inner adult in it is to just recognize, to know what's kind of going on. Your daughter isn't making a conscious choice to do that. She's just doing what they are being taught to do. So to get the resentment off and the projection off is like all of us who grew up, I want to hear from the chat, who grew up in a family that's like, sort of like your dad might be like, oh, your mom is so difficult. And then the kid just repeats it. Mom, you're kind of difficult. We'll see this in another question. Who relates to that? Who had a parent that overstepped boundaries and was like, your father is so difficult to please and blah, 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 blah. So the boundary that child's experiencing, as children, we should know none of this stuff. Ideally, it'd be amazing if we all had parents that were respectful of their partner and respect that the partner has a relationship with their child. So for the author of the question, you're a little bit caught. It's important for you to not try to character assassinate. I'm not saying you're doing this, but to try to to not react. You freeze, you're fun, you might shut down about it. But it would be great. Here's a goal of where to get to is when your daughter comes home and she says, daddy or mommy or the other parent says that you can't handle anything. If you can work through your trauma responses to be able to parent and kind of say, let's talk about that, and it doesn't sound very kind, but there are some things I am good at. I am good at getting you to school on time. I am good at kind of packing your lunch. Don't get into so much so who said what about whom, but just, we can parent and do some reality testing. And And that is one way to kind of battle it in that way. To not address it just is going to make it worse. So, um, and it's also, this is probably the best piece of advice I have for you, to step out of all the BS. You have this ex and you have this kid that's now probably triggering you, and your inner child might want to project onto you, the toddler, and take it personally or shut down or say that she's right or whatever. A lot can go on with that. That's why I highly recommend getting into an RRP group or get or linked up with an RRP therapist. Here is that link again. And I talk about this kind of stuff in the webinar, as well as these are kind of complicating factors that gets in the way of our parenting. But what is always a good thing to keep to is to keep to your daughter is coming in with all that stuff from your ex. What is the teaching moment? And the teaching moment is to help your toddler know that it's not good to repeat gossip. You know, it's not, like, honey, like, I'm wondering if someone is gossiping about me. You don't have to name who or whatever. But, honey, it's not good or kind to be repeating things. Like, if you go to daycare and someone says, Timmy picks his nose and wipes it on the wall. And if you hear that, you don't know that that's fully true, but it's also you're gossiping. You're talking in a bad way about somebody else. How would you feel if someone gossiped about you? What if someone said at daycare that, "Oh, Sally only eats half her lunch because she's so picky?" You wouldn't feel good if someone was, and even if even if it's like it's gonna be like Charlie Brown speak to a toddler, but that's the thing that you wanna be battling against. So, I hope that that makes sense. I really appreciate that question. Next question is, why am I so terrified to set boundaries? How do I know if a relationship is safe or healthy for me, or that I'm not just acting out old childhood wounds and pushing people away? Chances are, if that is a strategy for you, I love the question. And if you're worried about, sometimes it is a judgment call. And when let's just say we're dating somebody and we start to get to know them and we really don't, we've had bad luck, we have childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is always going to be about, as kids, our perception was kind of really damaged or taken away. So we don't know who's safe. So if we grow up to be super codependent and people pleasing, or we're shame based, we're going to elevate other people and not catch when they're not safe. Or if we grew up in a very kind of nasty home and everybody is distrustful or no one is trustworthy, you might absorb that and carry that on as well. So if you do know, though, that you have a pattern, who has a pattern of pushing people away? Who has that pattern that I talk about in videos? I used to have this thing called the "you're dead to me" kind of a thing. The minute someone that I was dating or a friend or whatever would disappoint me, or I would feel like they're disappointing me, I would go to this almost mafioso, "You're dead to me. I'm never talking to you again" kind of a thing. Like it's a very much a fight response, childhood trauma response or trauma response. And if you know that about yourself, because you're asking, how do I know if a relationship is safe and healthy for me, and that I'm not just acting out of childhood wounds and pushing people away? If you know that about yourself, chances are that that's probably what is primarily going on, paired with sometimes people aren't safe. What I would really recommend, why am I so terrified of boundaries? Is probably because speaking your mind or speaking up or talking about how you were sort of feeling, or boundaries weren't modeled in the family. Or like me, if you were innocently, actually, like a toddler can kind of set boundaries. Dad, I don't like the way you speak to me like that. But if they're brutalized in that moment by an abusive parent, we stop setting those boundaries. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? Like, is anyone a parent out there that you're kind of blown away that your toddler can just kind of speak the truth and whatever because they're safe? We were like that too, probably, but it quickly went away when we would get abused by asking such questions. So, terrified to set boundaries, that's probably in your story in some way. But to answer this question is, and hopefully this isn't frustrating to you, is like, this is really, some questions aren't really answerable, like up two streets, take a left. How do I know? How do I not know? I would answer this is like, you need a process in therapy of being able to work with a therapist and be able to bounce things off that therapist consistently, to be able to learn how to reclaim some perception. When I really lucked out with a good therapist, and I would come in and I'd be like, yeah, my boss said this, and it sounded abusive, but I don't even know. And my therapist would be able to say like, whoa, they said that to you? Wow. And not only that, then the therapist was like, it also sounds like your family. So I was able to get a lot of help about kind of bouncing things off of people, because that's actually what kids get in a healthy family system. I'm going to put this list of therapists back in the so does that make sense? How do I know if it's not, how do I know if a person is safe or it's my childhood trauma response? You can start to work on yourself and reparent and sort of, creative list of your reactions and get insightful and know yourself and know, like, eventually I was like, wow, I really go to this big place and cut people out the minute I feel like they're disappointing me. And I can relate that back to my mom. But sometimes I would still need to bounce situations off somebody, a therapist or someone who's working on themselves as well. That can be tricky too, because if you have a friend that is equally struggling with perception, that can be tricky as well. So I don't know if I'm doing justice um to these questions. Right, I threw my back out a little bit earlier last couple of days, so I'm not on my A game, but I'm trying. So that's what I would suggest, and forgive me if it's not like I'm not answering. I don't like to answer questions in a way of like, read this book, take a thing, take a test, do the thing or whatever. It's very concrete, where a lot of these answers are going to be about the process of going and experiencing some kind of healing experience in psychotherapy, or I know that that's not available to you all, or doing something else. Next question is about parenting question. I have two kids under 3, and I struggle with rage seemingly only when I'm trying to put my baby to sleep. My toddler sometimes follows us and makes noise that wakes up to the baby and ruins that nap. Very frustrating. I feel such intense rage that I need to close the door and scream silently. You're doing an amazing job, because that tells me you're really protecting them. And I'm completely screen free, but not much else seems to occupy my toddler enough for me to put my baby to sleep. My question is, how much of my rage is, I love this question. Who relates to this? This is whenever you're triggered, this is such a thing that we need when we're triggered. Is it me, or is it the present, or is it my stuff? My question is, how much of my rage is reasonable given the circumstance? I would say very reasonable. And how much of it is a result of my CPTSD? Probably both. That's the tricky piece. There's a video I did on how to know, I forget the title. It's about 3 or 4 years old now. It's like what to do when you're triggered. And I have this kind of rule going on that when we're triggered, when we're rageful and you got to scream silently and you're a mess and it's parenting is extremely hard. And I'm not trying to invalidate you, but I would say 80% of that energy belongs or is rooted in our past, and 20% is a present issue. And that 20%, though, can be kind of high concentrated. You got 2 small kids. Every day is going to be, you're exhausted every day. That's a long time. A good friend of mine said the hardest thing about raising kids is the early years, because there's never enough time, resources, or money. It's just how it is. Having 2 kids under 3 until they're about 5 or 6, it's like the pressure is gonna be on constantly. It's feel like the first month of having an infant feels like one long day. Um, so 80% is rooted in childhood trauma, but the 20% can really be brutal. 20% being the remainder that belongs in the present. So it's very valid. You haven't slept and you're trying to not do screens, but your toddler, who is not going to get the boundaries at that age, they kind of think in a very egoic, in the moment. Sometimes, I don't want to say toddlers are narcissistic, but they're developmentally all about themselves. They don't, it's one of the examples that I give in the parenting webinar. Let me put that back. The parenting webinar is this Saturday. Here is the information on it. And I give the example in that webinar where I talk about, you have the flu and your 3-year-old keeps coming in to wake you up because they want you to take him out for ice cream. And they're like, are you better yet? And you're close to rage. So I name that stuff in the webinar. So, but the 20% in the present is really typical, exhausting parenting stuff that is very, very hard. So I want to break this myth that there's no parent out there that, some people have a lot more patience than I do, but I don't think there's any parent out there that wouldn't be affected by what you're experiencing. Um, So there's that. Let me come back to the question. And I hate how I feel towards, you can be frustrated, but that's probably the trigger. I hate how I feel towards my innocent toddler that just wants to hang out with her mom. So you get it. But that is what I also talk about in the webinar is most likely you are triggering yourself or feeling like you might be like one of your parents. Who had a parent like mine who would hate that you had basic needs or would hate you for your developmental stuff? Who was raged at if they wet the bed? Who was expected to be a perfect little adult and you're 13 years old and you didn't get to have teenage years? That's the kind of stuff that I'm kind of talking about. That's to know there's some work there to do to reparent the inner child. This is big for everybody in this in the parenting webinar, is that we have to kind of flip the narrative from I'm a terrible parent because I want to rage at them because that reminds me of my dad and I don't want to do that, but I'm shitty for even feeling that way. When you're not, you're protecting them. We have to flip that from that narrative of that to this narrative of it's very normal to be at your wit's end with small children. You know, it doesn't make you a bad parent. What makes you a bad parent is if we lose it on them and shame them, or we're not taking care of ourselves, and or we're making it about us, or being kind of victimy, all the stuff that happened to us. Lastly on this one is the other thing I talk about in the webinar is practicing kind of a model of what is good enough. Because who approaches stuff from a place of perfectionism? Like you can really relate to this parent. I don't want them to have screen time and I want to get my kid on a good sleep cycle, but something's got to give. Do you know what I mean? Perfectionism can, what I'm getting at is maybe allow the toddler some screen time from a place of it's good enough so that you don't have to go to that place. Sometimes as a childhood trauma survivor, who relates to this, that you feel like you have to do everything perfectly. It's another level of triggering. You know, like I have to be the perfect parent all the time. I don't want them. I want to do attachment parenting. I don't want them to do any screen time. You know, all those things are good concepts, but is your rationale behind those things coming from a place of trauma? It's true for anything, where you're a parent or not. Like, who approaches their recovery like that? I have to watch every single video. I have to do the thing. I have to go to therapy. I have to go to Al-Anon. I have to read the book. I have to do it perfectly or I'm going to miss the thing. You know, it's like we're not taking in the learning because we're approaching something from a place of wounding from our trauma. Hopefully that makes sense. How are we doing out there in the chat? How am I doing so far? How many of you are there right now? Let me check. Let me check. Wow, there's 200 of you. Cool. All right. And I gotta, sorry about the echo there. Just checking. Cool. Is the chat still working? We're doing all right? Cool. All right, next question. How am I doing on time? I gotta hurry up. How do you work through the trigger of people getting too close, really knowing who you are, and being able to stay in therapy or a support group? I know I need other people, but it's too much for me. I feel exposed in these relationships. Really good question. You could check out on my website. There's a course called Reparenting the Inner Child. I would say this is kind of the function when it comes to inner child work. I would say that when someone is going through this, where you might be ghosting a therapist or getting out of relationships or not going back to the support group because it's very exposing, it is very hard in the beginning of those relationships. But inner child work is not, it's not always about the inner child. A lot of it is about finding your inner adult and being able to increase your tolerance. Like it's the adult you that can start going to one support group a week and just kind of doing it and setting the goal to not miss any for like 3 months. But it's a beautiful example too of, for those who don't quite get the inner child concept, your adult is the part of you that's like, I should go see a therapist. I'm feeling like I have some issues. I'm not feeling great about my life and I live in existential dread and my relationships are not that great. And my relationship to self is not that great. That is your inner adult. I'm going to show up to this live and maybe, be around some other people and sort of hear what Patrick has to say about some issues. I just feel like I'm doing something for myself. That is your inner adult. It is your inner child who doesn't want to go. And that feeling can be huge. When we start off, it's just like we have just 1% of our inner adult in place and 99% of the inner child that's like, yeah, fuck that group. I'm not going back. I just can't, I can't, or that therapist is like, they were very intimate. I just can't do it. Also, another clue to what is your inner child is whenever you have a very strong, I can't speak up. I can't ask for my needs. I can't ask for that day off. Does that make sense to folks? Anyone out there struggling with what exactly is the inner child? We're really talking about two different types of your parts of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex represents the inner adult. That's like, oh, I'm going to show up to that live and maybe learn something and do the thing or go to therapy, or I should go to bed early tonight. But it's your inner child that's like, oh, let's doom scroll. So there's this left and right experience that happens. But mostly the feelings of the inner child is like, I can't tolerate this group or this therapist or something like that. So it is a little bit, I would say, when people really start their childhood trauma, I think it takes about a good 6 months to like a year and a half to 2 years to build up that inner adult by showing up and doing hard things. And what is going to be really helpful if your inner adult starts talking to your inner child and taking over. What I would say a really good trick is, like, let's just say you have a support group to go to tomorrow night, for your inner adult to say, I'm going to like leave you with someone that I care about. It's like a visual. You're talking to your inner child. I'm going to go to the meeting so you don't have to be so freaked out. I'm just going to approach it from my adult self. And I'll imagine that maybe Patrick is babysitting you or something like that. So you don't have to go there and feel so exposed, because that's a lot like our family. The other thing too is, do you know why therapy or a group is so intolerable? I would say, especially a group, our first group is our family. So whenever we're in a group, like a meeting at work or a psychotherapy group or an Al-Anon group or an AA group, our body remembers what's it like to be in a group, to be picked on, to be exposed, to not be seen. That's where it starts to feel not so great. But the inner adult can be like, oh, I know that my first group was awful. Not all groups are going to be like that, and increase your tolerance for going there. Hopefully that makes sense. Hi, Patrick. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. I share custody with my two children, 10 and 13, with my ex-husband. My boy, the youngest, asked his sister at the dinner table why she didn't like her dad. She answered that it was because he was angry a lot and not very pleasant to be around. My son then went on to justify his father's behavior by saying that his dad was just overwhelmed because he works so hard and he pays $400 a week, um, and pays me $400 a week to look after them. I feel like I need to say something, but I don't want to make it worse. I want my son to know that his value is not related to the dollars we spend on him. And mom works very hard also and often feels overwhelmed, but it's not an excuse to get angry and take it out on other people. Is there anything I'm missing, and what would you recommend in the situation? Love the question. Couple things. If you have open communication with your partner, your ex, I would kind of say, like, hey, he's repeating this stuff. You might just have to say it and then let go of the outcome. But hey, he's repeating this stuff. And I just want to make sure that you're not overly disclosing to him what you're going through, because a lot of what he's reporting is kind of none of his business. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can know that our parents are stressed, but this stuff is telling me that my son then went on to justify his father's behavior by saying that his dad was just overwhelmed because he works so hard and pays me. That's really overly sharing to a child to probably get back at you, or, if people following me, does anyone have a parent that, so one of my biggest pet peeves is when a parent just is like victimized in that way or tries to character assassinate. That, and I'm not saying this is typical of fathers. Anybody can do this in these co-parenting situations. So that's one thing, to address it head on with your co-parent. The other thing with your son is, to not give it so much power. this is going to seem, just bear with me here, to not give it so much power, because your son is protecting his father because the father is acting victimized around him. Who protected a parent before you kind of woke up to the childhood trauma? Anyone out there that was just like, yeah, mom, this was so much in my story. Mom sacrificed everything. She puts up with so much. Who repeated that stuff? Anyone relate to what I'm kind of saying? Like where one parent was really like the elevated parent, or who repeated parental kind of just what they were kind of saying? Who had a parent who was very victimized and would go out of their way to let you know just how much they were in trouble, you know? So what I'm getting at is kids will do this, especially when they have a parent who feeds them that. And there's not a lot of control that we can have over it. We do have to kind of wait until they're older, because eventually, like us waking up, your son might have to really figure out who his dad is. The other thing too is that your son might be protecting him because it's too painful to look at how messed up his father is. And you're doing a great job because you're kind of on the spot where, you know what I mean? Like, anybody would be like kind of biting their tongue to not be like, man, he's really like laying it on thick with you, you know? So that's, you may have to sit back and let your son eventually figure out who his dad is. But what you can say to him is never make it to be like in that other question that, dad shouldn't be sharing that with you. I would again keep it to a learning experience, and I might kind of say, well, your sister is experiencing your dad as angry. You don't need to erase what she is experiencing. You can simply say, I experience dad in a different way, and allow him his own opinion of dad. But the other piece to this, if I only read the question once. Um, my boy, the youngest, asked his sister at the dinner table why she didn't like her dad. They have the same dad. She answered that it was because he was angry a lot and not very pleasant to be around. My son then went on to justify his father's behavior. So I would make the teaching moment to be about, hey, if your sister feels that way about dad, don't shoot anybody down about how they're feeling about it. You could even educate your son. You could have been more curious about that. It's not a battle, because then you took it to, well, I think dad is like a hero because he's working so hard for us and whatever. Do you know what I mean? People can have different opinions. That is very different. And we really have to watch this than you kind of saying to your son, I don't think you should be hearing this stuff from dad, because then he's in trouble and now he might even be more lied with dad. So very, very tricky situation. I don't know if I'm giving the best advice out there. There are people who might know better than I. I'm not an expert in the co-parenting stuff, but um, it's when you're in these situations, you kind of have to be like a wise sage and just not engage in any of the ickiness or the drama, and just make it to be about what is going on, right? How do I set my son up for success in, say, 20 years, where he's going to be like, choosing the wrong side? And how do I do that in a non messy way? Very, very hard. I don't know if I could do it in the moment. Um, Moving on. How does one meet the social and bonding needs of three small children when constantly overwhelmed and depressed? Definitely feel like I'm the just work here dad. Let me read it again. How does one meet the social and bonding needs of three small children when constantly overwhelmed and depressed? Definitely feeling like I just work here dad. It's a beautiful question, and I really feel for you. In coming back to the webinar, the concept of good enough parenting is, talk about in the webinar how as parents it's we're walking through our own childhood trauma, and it's kind of realistic that we're a mess. And I want to play you something. Let me know if you can hear this, because this is a really cool thing. This is um, coming back to music. A gentleman, Nick Cave, has been around forever. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and he's been through a lot of grief. I believe his son passed away, and he's become this person who answers fan letters who are asking really deep questions. Some about trauma, some it's about existential. But let me just play this for you.
So the question, someone has written in, called Valerio from Stockholm, has written in saying, following the last few years, I'm feeling empty and more cynical than ever. I'm losing faith in other people, and I'm scared to pass these feelings on to my little son. Do you still believe in us, human beings? So this is the letter that I wrote. Dear Valerio, much of my early life was spent holding the world and the people in it in contempt. It was a position both seductive and indulgent. The truth is, I was young and had no idea what was coming down the line. It took a devastation to teach me the preciousness of life and the essential goodness of people. It took a devastation to reveal the precariousness of the world, of its very soul, and to understand that the world was crying out for help. It took a devastation to understand the idea of mortal value, and it took a devastation to find hope. Unlike cynicism, hopefulness is hard-earned, makes demands upon us, and can often feel like the most indefensible and lonely place on earth. Hopefulness is not a neutral position. It is adversarial. It is the warrior emotion that can lay waste to cynicism. Each redemptive or loving act, as small as you like, such as reading to your little boy, or showing him a thing you love, or singing him a song, or putting on his shoes, keeps the devil down in the hole. It says the world and its inhabitants have value and are worth defending. It says the world is worth believing in. In time, we come to find that this is so. Love, Nick. So the question.
So I love that, because it really cuts through what we're talking about. Like for this father, we can really be burdened by our own childhood trauma, where you're overwhelmed, you're depressed. There are 3 small children. Like that is, to me, in my mind, to have 3 small children, to make this to be more realistic, is that that tells me that unless you're getting a lot of support, and unless you have a lot of money, and unless you have a lot of access to resources, that you are every day exhausted and triggered at baseline. That is what that experience is like. So when you're asking, I'm constantly overwhelmed and depressed. So I'm just saying, at baseline, for normal people, 3 small children, that unless they have a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of support, they're going to be really struggling, because that's just what is that like. When constantly overwhelmed. So when you feel like you're just an I work here dad, that's probably a combination of that 80-20 stuff. There's your own childhood trauma, I'm assuming, and then the 20% is like you've got 3 small children. And what I loved about that Nick Cave reel was that we can really start to go into a hole if we feel like we're bringing our trauma into it, or we're not being our best. So comparing ourselves to parents who don't have childhood trauma, or just really being hard on ourselves, is going to make it worse. And what I loved about what he was saying is to have some hope, but also be present in little moments, because you're going to be comparing yourself to a perfectionistic idea. You're going to need a lot of help. If you're struggling with that much of and if you're here, I'm assuming you have childhood trauma. Are you getting any help with that? But for perspective, is just in little moments to read to your children, to share something that you love, to have a little bit of hope, is this good enough idea? In other words, to take the pressure off yourself, and to meet the social and bonding needs, is you're not going to do that perfectly. But I think it comes back also to that phrase, you know, that phrase where it's sort of like you don't remember what somebody said, but you do remember how they treated you? Like that is what we remember as children. Is just sort of, you know, it's okay to have something going on, but um it's amazing if you can just show up in smaller ways and not feel like you're a bad father because you're not showing up super energized doing things perfectly. You know, because that's not, we do that all over the place, whether you're a parent or an employee. Who struggles with that? That you really struggle with shame that you don't have the energy to meet your relationships where you want to. Unless we resolve a lot of the childhood trauma, I couldn't do that without a lot of help. So I hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm giving you some kind of idea, but really the answer is to take the pressure off and show up to your children in small ways, in small, good enough ways. You might be putting this idealistic thing up here, or if you're really, really struggling, I would seek out one of those therapists that I mentioned, and start. That's the best. Your best bet is if you're struggling, is to get some help and support for yourself if that's available to you. Put that back in the chat. So really appreciate that question. Where was I question wise? Okay, how are we doing on time? Pretty good. Why is it natural to give others what you didn't receive in childhood, but difficult to give those things to yourself? I'm going to read that again. I love this question so much. Raise your hand or put something in the chat if you relate to it. Why is it natural to give others what you didn't receive in childhood, but difficult to give those things to yourself? Then, when you come across people who don't reciprocate, you continue to try to keep giving, hopefully, what you didn't receive in the first place. I mean, then when you come across people who don't reciprocate, you continue to try to keep giving to hopefully get what you didn't receive in the first place. So you really have a two-part question there, and I love it. Why we do that is I really think it comes down to childhood trauma survivors struggle to have a sense of self. Why is it natural to give to others what you didn't receive in childhood? We often don't have a sense of self to know that we can deserve to be treated that way. There's a paradox here is who struggles to receive attention, spotlight, or gifts? Who gets a bit icked out by that? You know, who does not feel comfortable getting recognized at work? You know, so there's that really speaks to, it's just such a natural basic thing that hopefully we should be able to get from our family system, like with birthdays or being words of affirmation or being cherished by a parent, that there's a blank kind of barrier within ourselves that we will always give other people, but difficult to give these things to yourself. We can have deep beliefs that we don't deserve it. I think it's more of an existential problem of not having a sense of self enough to know there's that. Inner child work will be very, very helpful to you to develop a sense of who your inner child is and what they need and start to dialogue with them. And that kind of might jumpstart this relationship. It's what I really is the ultimate thing is kind of working towards being integrated, where our inner child and our inner adult are really on the same page in life. Because what you're describing is your inner adult knows what's up with me that I can't give to myself what I freely give to others. And your inner child is just, there's no connection to be able to kind of do that right now, if I have you right. Then the second part, you can like, then when you come across people who don't reciprocate the giving, that you try harder. Is that probably the legacy of the parents that you probably had? Of, you know, most of us as little kids, let me know if you relate to this. Most of us as little kids, who tried to get their parent to wake up to be a parent? Showing them drawings, trying to be a great kid, trying to clean the house, trying to be like, no one gets you, right, mom? You know what I mean? Like trying to be like a little cheerleader. Who relates to that? And, you know, it's really a leftover thing of trying to get somebody. I have this theory that if we can get, this is our codependency, if we can get a partner to wake up, and if we can energize them or if we can help them or solve their problems, then they in turn can be a parent for us. That's kind of like my theory around it. So to answer your question, really love this question. You'll get very far with doing some inner child work and develop a relationship with your inner child and kind of ask your inner child directly, like what doesn't feel good about getting a gift? What doesn't feel good about being in the spotlight? How would it feel if I made a special day for both of us and it's just about me and you? Your inner child, also inner children can kind of almost be like addicted to other relationships. And it's a kind of a feedback cycle, and hopefully I'm making sense here, is that many who out there, this is the best way to describe it. Is anybody on the chat right now hate the inner child stuff and you just want somebody else to parent you? Or you're highly resentful that you're not bad for this. I'm just saying it is what it is. Who is really resentful that they have to parent their inner child? Like you really don't want that work. You really don't want the job. It's a common stuck place in childhood trauma work. Um, and it's kind of like, I don't want to have to kind of do that. And we do have to get our inner adult to a place that we have to be open to our inner child. But I'm just saying, like, that's such a common barrier to this stuff. Why do I have to connect with myself? But the danger is when we don't develop a relationship with ourselves, we expect our partners to parent us. We expect the people that we're dating to maybe magically give us, like in a fantasy of what parents didn't give us. And that just becomes a mess. That's not good for the other person, and it's not good for you because the stakes are like too high. So hopefully that makes sense. Developing a relationship with your inner child and really figuring out like what's the barrier about. Because inner children can have a very strong fantasy that runs us. In reading your question, I'm not saying that this is it for you, but this is really a common thing. Inner children believe that if I can find the person and really be so nice to them that they will just magically fall in love with me, then we'll be happily ever after and we'll never fight. Does anyone ever have a fantasy like that? You know what I mean? Maybe when you were younger or whatever, but it's really the inner child kind of saying, I want to find my person so I can finally have a parent and have that attachment that I never had. So hopefully that makes sense. That's just my theory. I'm not saying that's like, a universal for everybody, but that's kind of like how I kind of see the stuff. Next question. I got a couple more here and then I got to log off. After raising our son, I'm realizing how horrible of a job my parents did as parents, and I never fully grieve their negligence. How do you grieve after trying to shed light on the pros of having crap parents? I'm the generation whose mom told us, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. I've been on my own since I was 17, and I usually tell myself they did me a favor by forcing independence. I know exactly what you mean, but we have to flip that to kind of like forcing independence is really neglect and abandonment. And I'm not arguing with you. I know exactly what you mean. I thought that way too. I never attached to my mom. I've never been able to trust her with my emotions. Now she's back in my life. She moved back to the same city that I live in as an elderly woman. I'm triggered by your presence. I understand that. While also trying to detach from my adult son so that he can live his own life. How do we grieve or find the emotion that was never cultivated? Again, I would highly recommend checking out an RRP group where all of that stuff is really discussed and you get to kind of have a process doing things like genograms and group work and being around other survivors as well. That's the link to that. Here is the link again to the webinar on Saturday about parenting. And, like where a lot of us as childhood trauma survivor, we have a reserve of grief that has never fully been dealt with. And these groups can help with that. And coming back to inner child work is that your inner child might still believe that they did you a favor by forcing independence, by kind of being not loving and you left home at 17. But childhood trauma beliefs like that, and I say this from experience, they always end up in a dead end, which is kind of like what I'm getting from your question. On one hand, I'm the super independent person and I was okay in life and I did all these things. But on the other hand, I'm detached from the grief of not having a mom in my life or feeling connected to anybody or feeling kind of special. And when you were raising your son, you kind of realize how bad it is. So you just simply have a reserve of grief that needs to be addressed. How do we grieve or find that emotion that was never cultivated? If you're feeling like that emotion is kind of stuck, the emotion is there, but these groups, an RRP group, kind of helps jumpstart a dead battery and will help that grief process by talking about this stuff. There's a short-term model, a 6-month model, which is just an introduction to that stuff, and a long-term model. Most people start in the 6-month unless they've done a lot of work on themselves to join a long-term group. If that makes sense. Starting to get froggy, and that's when I kind of know that I need to log off soon, but I got a couple more here. How do I know? So hopefully I really appreciate, really the answer is going to be to do some therapeutic work, whether an RRP group or some EMDR work, but to find a person and or a group and really start talking about grieving. There's a lot of loss. I left home. I'm not that far behind you. I left home at 19 when my family imploded, but I just went into the world very numb and just went into a place of doing, of work and rent and school. And I really needed, I wasn't processing back then either. And I was really stuck. The more we process, the more we deal with our grief, the more we really, with good people and effective therapy, talk about the childhood stuff, the more we get into our adult, but the more we also get our emotions back. So the other piece, though, I love about the question is there might be an emotional part of you that's a little bit muted or deadened, which is super normative for this stuff. But that's why I'm recommending therapy so much. That was true for me. How do I know when I'm ready to have my own kids? Or in other words, how can I make sure not to give my trauma to the next generation? Great question, brief question. I would say, and this is super specific, I would say in my case, I did about 3.5, I did a group psychotherapy and RRP group for 3.5 years processing my childhood trauma. And that just brought me up to baseline with the rest of the world. It brought me up to sea level with what I call the normies. And when I left that group, I felt really good about myself. I would still get triggered, but I was no longer controlled by shame or my reactions. Um, and it was a really good kind of foundation of work. I would say no one is ever fully ready to have kids because it's such a wild ride. But to answer your question about it, I would say that I do believe that people need to have some kind of fun foundation of therapeutic work, and where you're really doing some catharsis based stuff, some deep therapy, not just talk therapy. It's not like you just have a cool therapist that you talk about stressors every week. This is more like you're doing active childhood trauma work, a lot of heavy lifting. The other thing too is that a litmus test is that, having kids is very intimate, and a good sign is if you, that shows you can manage being a parent, is if you can manage being a partner, if you can really manage intimacy in that way. And I would also recommend, if it was just, I want to be kind here and have this not come across as draconian. That's not really kind of fair to myself. Here's what I really kind of think. I think when someone is looking at being a parent, I think that they have to have their emotional house in order as best as they can. I think that they really have to be thoughtful about a support system in their life. It's perfectly fine if people want to like raise a child on their own, but do you have support? Because I find that until you're in it, you don't really know how overwhelming it is. Um, and I kind of think you don't have to do it perfectly, but I think you kind of have to have some of those in place. So how do I know if I'm ready to have my own kids? Do you love yourself? Do you like yourself? Are you clear on what happened to you in your own childhood trauma? Is there any part of you that still feels that your parents were right about you? Um, do you still engage in behaviors that your family taught you, such as like character assassination or fight responses, or being nasty, feeling entitled to being nasty, all that kind of stuff? And I know that that sounds like a very tall order, but I think we can all agree that society would be in such better shape if we put into a lot more thought about what kids need and what do parents need, and what do parents need before they have kids, you know? because for millennia, people are just having babies just because that's what you do, you know? And here we all are. It's fucking Thursday at 7 p.m. We're talking about childhood trauma on YouTube. You know what I mean? We should be talking about bonsai trees or something, you know, or like, or establishing a society where, you know, we have daycare centers and nursing homes in the same area because we value the elderly and we value, and you know, like all that stuff. But here we are. We're talking about childhood trauma on YouTube. So I would love, I would love to see maybe before my in my lifetime more of these things in place. The one other thought to this, the other reverse to it is that who gets triggered by people who choose to have children? Because that's kind of a thing. And I see kind of some nasty comments as a parent myself. And I get it, but you know, about it's a very difficult world to bring a child into, especially now. But I do want to encourage people to watch their reactions because I see a lot of people getting enraged or getting nasty with people who ask parenting questions. If becoming a parent is not for you, I would leave it at that because I kind of see some judgmental nastiness. Why would you think to have a parent right now? Why would you even think, you know what I mean? Like, it's just to notice that you are triggered when people are talking about parenting, and you might be triggered to people seemingly being thoughtless or oblivious in your mind. So I'm just kind of like, look at that is what I'm suggesting. Let's see. How do you stop the pattern of abandoning yourself and people pleasing learned while growing up in an abusive alcoholic family so that you can be a healthier parent now? I would recommend looking into an RRP group. I would recommend checking out the parenting webinar. Going to put those both in the chat again. A list of therapists and the parenting webinar on Saturday. Did both of those links come up? Yeah, let me do one at a time. Abandoning yourself is super. I would do that as well. I grew up in an alcoholic home. An RRP group is going to help with that, just how to relate to people on a different way. And let me get back to your question. I'm just messing around, copying and pasting these links. Bam, there you go. No, I just did my Control V. Yeah. It's getting late and I'm getting froggy. How do you stop the pattern of abandoning yourself and people pleasing learned while growing up? First, to kind of look at when you grow up in an abusive alcoholic family, you're abandoned. So it's like that other comment about that other question about connecting with the inner child. Oftentimes a lot of childhood trauma survivors have a big barrier, like inner child. I don't know, what is that kind of a thing where, and you might be almost like from a place of addiction, getting into people pleasing because your inner child believes that that's how you'll receive love. And that kind of never really kind of works out. Joining a group, I would really look into some Al-Anon, Codependent No More, and start working on those kind of things. And it is an annoying pattern. One other, I love a concept that I learned from my mentor is that who hates their trauma response? Who hates that you might go to a fight place and really wreck up relationships because you go over the top and maybe overpower somebody? Who hates that they can people please and kind of seem, it's not a great, you know what I mean? Like you might feel like you don't like yourself when you people please. Who caretakes, who looks for a rescue, who has a lot of limerence going on and you just kind of hate that that's what you have going on. Why I bring that up is these are things we would have not have chosen in our adulthood. Like if we had a time machine and we went back to the author of the question back when you were 10 years old and I showed up and said, hey, do you want to be a very people pleasing person and kind of be selfless and not have a sense of self, and then get a lot of mess comes across as that, and you don't like yourself because you people please? Do you want to do that? No one would choose this. These are things that are kind of dumped on us or handed to us, or these are strategies that we had to come up with to survive. So we kind of have to change the relationship we have with our trauma responses. Yes, burning bridges is a big one. I burnt many a bridge in my life. I had to blow things up in order to feel justified to leave it, which has a lot to do with my family. But if you asked me when I was 10, like, hey, do you want to burn a lot of bridges with relationships and jobs and bandmates and all kinds of stuff like that? You want to get nasty with people? I wouldn't have chosen that. But it's how my mom operated. So I kind of learned from her. So abandoning yourself, if you have alcoholic parents, they're also abandoning themselves as well. You just may have chosen a less destructive addiction and into codependency. So I highly recommend an RRP group, Al-Anon, Codependent No More. Really appreciate these questions. One more question, then I'm going to log off. Experiencing childhood trauma and then becoming a parent feels so intense at times. My son is only 3, but we've encountered so many examples in his young life that made me grieve for the childhood I could have experienced. I know exactly what you mean. Had I had an emotionally regulated, mature, and safe caregivers? Do you have any recommendations or practice methods to use when these feelings come up to ensure that I'm feeling and processing the emotions without getting overwhelmed by them? Again, an RRP group or the webinar is going to be really helpful to you. There's a thing that it can be healing to have a child and to be able to give them what you didn't experience, but it's not all the healing. Like you're suggesting, there's grief that comes up. So it's just the parenting that you're giving your son is reminding you that you have work to do. Recommendations or practices is like, yes, you can definitely dialogue. You can go to my website and buy the Reparenting the Inner Child course and start to reparent the inner child, that when you do get triggered, you're able to care for yourself in real time. That is helpful to get to the beliefs and establish a relationship with the inner child. But I really think that there's a backlog of grief that needs to be addressed in therapy if that's available to you. So sometimes with these questions, do you have any tips or hacks or recommendations or what do I do? And I very much get that you just want some guidance there. And I'm sorry that most of my answers are about therapy. It's because a lot of these questions involve process. And all us therapists love that word process. The process of, say, in an RRP group, of putting your whole family system on paper like in a genogram and telling your group about it. The process of doing some rage work, the process of doing some grief work in these groups, they really help you get to the feelings. If you're dialoguing about it, which can be helpful, deal with the emotions in the moment, dialoguing, that's for those who don't know, dialoguing is when we talk with our inner child on paper between our dominant hand and our non-dominant hand, and I have a whole course about it. Dialoguing is really about managing our emotions in real time, but just know you can manage your emotions in real time, but you still have your own childhood to kind of deal with, if that makes sense. Let me actually find you the course. Why is my internet so slow right now? It's just slow. Okay. And the course is available. You could buy that course a la carte, or you can buy the membership. It's Reparenting the Inner Child. Let me get you the link. I'm trapped by my own pop-ups. Son of a bitch. All right. Where's the courses? Courses. Bear with me here, everybody. I'm almost there. Reparenting. This is actually the most popular course. Yeah, let me put this in the chat. Okay. There you go. So I hope that was it. I'm getting froggy. Let's go back to talking about music in the chat, or what I would love to know, which questions stood out the most for you out of the questions that I read. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions, just only some of them. Sometimes I pick the questions that are more applicable to many people at the same time. Will you ever be reading the rest of those questions? Probably not, because I can't. I might hold on to them for another one. They don't go anywhere, but I'm kind of limited. And I think just in this, I think I got like maybe something like 300 questions. So I apologize that I can't get to them all. And some of the questions are not fully answerable. Some of the questions I might be kind of saying, I think you just need to find a therapist and really work on that thing for like a year, rather than me giving you a go up 2 streets and take a left kind of a thing. Let's see. What are people saying in the chat? What is the expected outcome of taking that course? The course that I referenced, Reparenting Your Child, is learning the skill of learning how, when you're triggered, or learning to develop a relationship with your inner child. Dialoguing is extremely helpful when you're actively triggered, but you kind of have to do it 2 or 3 times a week to get into the habit of using it, to actually use it when you are triggered. Favorite 90s band back then? Oh, that's tough. Pumpkins, Smashing Pumpkins. That was really my first love. That Siamese Dream album, I think, saved my life. Because I was so into it, so into learning the drum parts. I play drums. Yes. Let's see. It's kind of wild. We had just watched Lola Young's Messy music video. Great song. Then came in to see Patrick Teahan. Cool. Go check out Crush, because I also want to do a video about that song Crush, because it has a lot to do with limerence. Yep. Pearl Jam, Alive. Man, I actually auditioned. I was like, this is in my hometown. I was about 16 years old. This was a huge win for me. We were so into Pearl Jam's Alive, and these older kids, I was 16, they were like 22, 24. They needed a drummer. I answered their ad in a paper, and they came in to just watch into my basement and just watch me play drums. And I played them Pearl Jam's Alive from memory. And they're like, you got the job. So that's my Pearl Jam story. $10, like $10, you were a Slipknot fan. No, I actually need to still explore a lot of that. Who's your favorite guitarist? Dang. Oh, Johnny Greenwood. John Lennon, actually. Looking at the Beatles again, he's an incredible rhythm guitarist. We only kind of see him as like the lead guy writing the songs. I'm on the first section of the Family Rules. Very cool. That's another course. Any more questions? Do you work with neurodivergence with trauma? It's interesting. We just had a meeting of all the RRP therapists, and some of them are more skilled with neurodivergence. I've had neurodivergence in my groups, but I'm not an expert. And, I kind of wish I was, but I kind of live in a neurotypical world for myself, but I'm not fully trained in working with neurodivergence. And I would love that, but there are RRP therapists that are more skilled than I am. If you go to the Molly's website, if you go to that link, and a woman named Molly, she has really done some wonderful training around it, and is can bridge RRP with neurodivergence. What about Jeff Beck? Jeff Beck is a badass. He really, really is. I have one Jeff Beck album, and he's recently passed away. He was very much a intense dude, kind of perfectionist, but like played a Stratocaster, and what he could do with that was just I'm always blown away every time I see clips of Jeff Beck. But I'm still kind of like getting into that kind of fusiony kind of stuff. I think I'm such a snotty indie rocker that I still need to explore the fusion, just the virtuoso kind of stuff. Because back in the day when I was auditioning for that band, playing Pearl Jam, we would just put our noses up in the air with a lot of stuff like that. Crush of what artist? Do I have a crush on an artist? Maybe ask the question again, Trump. Do I have a crush on? Cool story, Patrick. I hopefully being sincere, like, cool story, bro. You were 17. Lola Young. My 2-year-old is terrified of anyone. She's on par with language, but is not developmentally delayed. But she has some just bring some love there. And also, we're born with little personalities. So some kids are just really cautious until they're not. It's just one thought. Sorry to overly simplify that question. Do you compose? Yep, I write songs. I'm getting back into songwriting. I stopped playing in bands when my son was around 1, but I played in bands and wrote songs. Do you offer any scholarships, income-based? Not at the moment, because the courses are already greatly reduced. Patrick, do you like the influencer part of your work? It's tough to get information out without that element. I have a love-hate relationship with like in some days I wake up and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I'm, like I'm doing a funny video or something like that. But it's just something that's kind of just it. I did some videos and then all of a sudden I'm doing this. So it's something that kind of just took me into that work. It's tough to get information out without that element. Yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes I want to be watching like um there's a fine line between being an influencer and being accurate or something like that. I do like Danny Carey drum cam at a concert in Boston. I do love him. I love his drumming, the clips that I see. And I'm just kind of, it's funny because he's wearing a Celtics uniform and he's a Bostonian, but he looks like people I would grow up with who I would never assume can play in time signatures like that. Oh my God, guy, you're playing in 7/5, 7/4. The song Crush. I don't know the song Crush. Crush by, Lola Young. Taylor Hawkins, an incredible drummer. Listen to Michael Power sometime. Okay. Other Coachella finds were Remy Wolf and the Glass Beams. I think I've heard of them. Do you listen to classical? Yes, I love classical music, and I went to school, did my undergraduate degree in music at a state school up in Boston, and I learned. I came in as a drummer, and I kind of left as kind of a pianist. Played some Bach as best as I could. Loved the piano. Learning piano and getting a degree in music was more accessible than staying to my instrument, which was drums. Just saw you singing in a post. Yeah, I'm trying to put myself more out there and kind of get my voice back. Any appreciation for Jay Mascis and Dinosaur Jr.? Yes, Thad. I have a Jay Mascis Jazzmaster. I've always appreciated Dinosaur Jr., but I've never been such a huge fan. But I did just see him back in September with Weezer and the Flaming Lips. They're loud. That dude is loud. I even think I saw Jay Mascis at an airport in Chicago. Hi, Patrick. Thank you for your content. Persistent, trying out. Thank you so much. Your videos make mental health more accessible. Thank you so much. I think a big kind of mission in my mind about the videos is I want to show more about childhood trauma relationships and issues and show people from a visual place rather than sort of saying like, oh, it's disassociation. Like I do use that word quite a bit, but like getting away from overly clinical language. I didn't know Danny Carey was from Kansas. I thought he was from Boston. Well, he's wearing a Celtics thing, and like maybe he is, or maybe that's to connect. No, I'm Larry Bird was from Illinois. Jose Palacios of Incubus is also okay. He's also called the Octopus. Check out the drumming Timothy Fletcher in Baltimore. Cool. Well, all right, guys, I gotta go rest the pipes. I always love doing these. Thank you so much for showing up and hanging out with me. I always say I want to do one of these a month, but I'm just like, I'm so busy. I'm trying to write a book, trying to do the videos, trying to create courses. Can I get a membership with Google Pay? I don't think it's set up with Google Pay, but you can try. I'm glad the post crack you up. Jazz R&B. Oh, if anyone's into R&B, yesterday I saw this awesome podcast. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was Ray Davies of the Kinks giving a review of Otis Redding's Blue album, which has always loved that record, but I was listening to Ray Davies just kind of talk about it with historical context, and I'm going to fall in love with that record again. Otis Redding Blue. What is on it? A tune called Down in the Valley. A change is going to come. Just gorgeous. And also thinking about what I loved about Ray Davies, he was talking about how recording was different back then and how they recorded it in such a way. Like when we think about the recording of like a Chappell Roan song, Chappell Roan, to something like made in 1966, where there's like the musicians are hanging around one or two mics, and it's just very different. It was very interesting. Ray Davies talking about Otis Redding. He died when he was 26. He was an amazing, amazing person. Galaxy 500 drummer. Dang, Craig. Bringing out that guy. That guy, if you're a fan of Luna, Craig, highly recommend you check out a book called Black Postcards. It's written by Dean Wareham of Galaxy 500. He talks about really the whole story of Galaxy 500 into Luna. What is the name of that guy? He's very simple, but he's pretty amazing because it's just like so shoegazy and incredible. Thank you so much for bringing that up. The Galaxy 500 drummer, a little bit neurotic. Like in the book, you read about he couldn't go to the bathroom while on tour. I'll just leave that as is. Otis Redding, there's something about his version of A Change Is Going to Come. Right. And I have to listen to the Sam Cooke version of it. Thanks for all that you do. Take care, Toodles. Until next time, Toodles. All right, people. I got to go. Thank you so much. Love you all. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm going to end the stream, and this will become a video. And one last time, let me put these links up. Here is the parenting course for Saturday. If you're struggling with parenting, highly recommend it. I really enjoyed putting that course together. The webinar, you get a worksheet, you get the video, you get slides. There's a Q&A during the live, and that is a list of RRP therapists. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to log off. I'm going to try to do this again in a month because I have such a good time. I might want to do one where we just talk about music to take a break from the doom and gloom of childhood trauma. That might be fun. I would enjoy that. I'd show up for that. Do an open mic, singing my songs. All right. Bye, everybody. Much love. We'll see you soon.